Greetings, respective viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So here I am in Cork at the Elizabethan Fort. So this fort is just north of the city centre. It was part of the defence of the city until 1690, and it was built in 1601. So just 2 years before Elizabeth I died. She was the Queen of Ireland, though she never came to Hibernia. Anyhow, obviously Cork was a walled city for centuries. And it's really only after this fort was rendered obsolescent about 1690 that the walls broke down. Just small sections of them can still be seen. People plundered them for stone, they were built over and so on. Anyway, it was built then because there'd been a big rebellion, the Desmond Rebellion here in Munster, which had been put down obviously by fighting, but also partly by deliberately destroying food stocks. And obviously depriving the enemy of comestibles is a stratagem as old as warfare itself. The trouble is that affects civilians as much as it does soldiers, and you know, if you really want determined to win, who are you going to prioritise in your own side, feeding soldiers as feeding civilians? If you want to win, you've got to prioritise feeding soldiers, even though that's going to have a horrific human cost. Anyway, there'd been an Ulster rebellion before that in the 1780s, which the people of Munster largely hadn't participated in. So Elizabeth I was our queen, but she mainly controlled the east coast, and obviously in Ireland, just as in England and Wales, a lot of royal control was indirect, was through local magnates. The Earl of Kildare, he was the primary nobleman in Ireland, and so getting him to cooperate. This was a Lord Deputy of Ireland who was really sort of the understudy for the monarch, because the monarch almost never came here, and the Lord Deputy was carrying out the royal will. Obviously we had Irish Parliament, we had a Privy Council here too. But anyway, the key differences, I suppose, is in the 1530s the Reformation had taken place in England, and almost everyone being an Anglican, that's the same member of the Church of England. The Reformation in Ireland followed shortly afterwards, but never really caught on. The majority of us remained Catholics. Most of us were Irish speaking. Only on the east coast and some towns such as Cork were Anglophone. Obviously some English immigrants had been moving in here since the 12th century, but they largely remained Catholic. But I won't go into it too much. So the Spanish invaded in support of the rebellion here, and Hugh O'Neill, the Great O'Neill, he was in Ulster. He'd been rebelling up until this point. Then there was O'Sullivan Bear down at West Cork, and he was fighting as well. There was a siege of his castle there, and when he was finally defeated, he retreated way up into the Midlands of Ireland. But, so there'd been this Anglo-Spanish war going on for the better part of 20 years. So Elizabeth I died in 1603, and then James VI, the King of Scots, came to London. He was King of England, he was King of Ireland. He never visited Ireland, but he arranged peace with the Spanish, the Treaty of Hampton Court, ending an almost 20-year Anglo-Spanish war. But obviously that affected Ireland as well. So he was quite into conciliation, offering generous terms to those insurgents who surrendered. The Battle of Kinsale had been Christmas Eve 1601, in which the Spanish forces and the rebels here had been defeated. So that was that. And don't imagine that all Catholics were on the insurgent side or the Spanish side. No, some of them were before the crown, even though certainly Catholics in England were persecuted. But Elizabeth I was willing to look the other way sometimes, particularly in Ireland, because the majority of people were Catholic. So she just had to live with that. Anyway, what was I going to say? So why was there such liberality on the part of James I? He became James I of Ireland, James I of England. He simply wanted to end the war, and thought if he offered mild terms, people would say, okay, he's compassionate, we can live with this, let's just accept these peace terms. And the Spanish also are exhausted, they want to make peace. So that happened. But then he heard that people were actually plotting a revolt after all. I think largely bogus, maybe a few people were, but not many people wanted a return to conflict. So anyway, he was planning to take action against those who were plotting another rebellion. So 1607, people heard about this, and the leaders of the native Irish tribes, they fled. That's called the Flight of the Earls. So thing is, we were divided into tribes, often fighting each other. People often think that pre-Norman Ireland was some sort of demi-paradise, but nothing could be further from the truth. We often hear this nationalist trope, oh, things were absolutely fine here until the English came along and stuck their oar in and messed it all up. And okay, English people have done bad things, sometimes have messed things up. Sometimes have interfered, not just here but elsewhere. But that doesn't mean that all was sweetness and light before they arrived. Because we're always fighting each other, trying to steal each other's cows and so on. But anyway, in the 16th century, the monarch had pursued a policy of surrender and re-grant. So the Gaelic chieftains say, okay, we renounce our right to lead our tribe and we'll get a title directly from the king. But then it's in his gift, so what he's granted he could take away, he could give that to somebody else. So we're having English-style titles as in Baron whoever, Viscount whoever, you know, Earl of wherever, things like that. Titles like Earl of Kildare, although they were Anglo-Norman immigrants from the 12th century. Anyway, so more about the Elizabethan fort. You can see what some of the cannon were like back then. So because artillery was getting increasingly potent, had such a range, it was built in, these bastions were built with a mutual supporting aspect to them. There were salients actually sticking out. These forts could be almost star-shaped, so that there'll be interlocking fields of fire, and the walls are very thick, as you might see. Sometimes they had mounds of earth to back them up. So you see here how it goes out like a salient, right, jutting out towards the city, overlooking the city. Trouble is, if you catch this fort, then you can bombard the city very easily. It's very low-lying. An island is the centre of Cork, but you know it's like 5 kilometres long, more. It was about 6 islands if you go back to the 16th century, but gradually the various channels of the river were built over, leaving only the North Channel and the South Channel. Anyway, this place commands a splendid vista over the city, some of the modern housing, and I can remember when so many of these buildings were derelict. Cork was a bit of a dump when I was little in the 80s, to be absolutely frank. With very high unemployment, things just weren't maintained. So you can see that's over towards the north side of the city, up on the hill there. That's Corona Brocha, that area. A church built in the 1980s is quite prominent, and some red building right over on this side here, very probably difficult for you to make out, is the old mental hospital, St. Mary's Hospital, but they used to call it the funny farm, the loony bin, all sorts of opprobrious terms, and it was enormous. It's the kind of thing that a madman might design. And anyway, the Beamish Brewery used to be over there under reconstruction. What else can I say? Without zooming, it's difficult to make things out. You can see that is it the National Monument on the Grand Parade right behind me. Anyway, so then 1690, there were the Williamite Wars, Cork being an overwhelmingly Catholic city. We were Jacobites. But quite a few other people in the city were Protestants, but the countryside, apart from say Bandon, they say Bandon, where even the pigs are Protestants, almost everyone was Catholic down here. So we took over, that was that. But anyway, the Battle of Boyne was won by William III, and then he came down here with the Duke of Marlborough, and they successfully invested the city. There was some bombardment, and the Jacobite commander caved in quite easily, and he'd secured terms of mercy from the Williamites, and indeed they did show quarter. People often go on about the barbarous crimes of Cromwell, but on this occasion, the English, Welsh, whether they were Dutch, French Huguenots, I suppose, they were merciful, and no civilian was killed. Well, no soldier was killed after surrender, so far as I know. So that was that. Read about it in Macaulay's History of England, because then in 1690, Ireland, we were the fulcrum of European history, and therefore world history, because Europe was the continent that was able to project its power onto the rest of the world. So then, after that, sometimes the English army was here, the Irish army was here, and we had a Royal Irish Army. See the flag of Cork up there? Well, it's not the real flag. The flag of Munster. Anyway, you can see St Finbarr's, the Anglican cathedral behind me. It looks like some sort of Gothic horror folly. The 3 gold crowns of Munster on the blue field. So the British Army was here after the Union, and then the Irish Civil War was fighting here. The barracks was burnt down, rebuilt in the 1920s as a Garda barracks, as in Garda Síochána, Guards of the Peace. That's the police here in the Republic of Ireland. We call them Guards of the Peace partly because they didn't carry firearms, almost never. Some special tactical response teams, because we had the RIC beforehand, Royal Irish Constabulary, who did have firearms. They rarely carried them, only in very dicey situations. So anyway, 5 years ago, the Guards used to be operating here, now they're going to turn into an art centre and holiday cottages. So you can see the parade ground they used to have there. Okay, so that's the Elizabethan fort. I remember when it was a Garda barracks and this place was kind of, well, decrepit, if that's the word you could apply to an inanimate object, and we weren't allowed to walk the walls. So I'm about to go down and out. Anything else to say about the Elizabethan fort? Well, yeah, there was O'Leary, a man from this strait, who went on to serve in the Venezuelan army, fight for Venezuelan independence, and rise to prominence there, interred in the pantheon of heroes in Venezuela. An ex-soldier of the British Army of the Napoleonic Wars, with a gun for hire. Did he really believe in the cause, perhaps? Okay, I shall switch it off now.